Hello YouTube. So I'm back with more everything. I think I'm gonna call it a game after I have done all of the seminars. Seems like a good point to say, okay, I've played enough of the game. Let's move on to something different. Okay, I had expected to beat the whole castle right away, but apparently I still need to move around. Let's create more pieces of castle. Well, whatever. Pretty funny how I'm just a whole castle all at once. I wonder if I can be a person at some point in the game. It would make sense, wouldn't it? Like... And now I'm a sheep. An animal that I have come across before but didn't really do much with back then. Yeah. Let's see, did stuff happen to me? Well, not particularly on the uni front, just, you know, working on normal assignments, doing basically just standard stuff. Animal ecology is getting slightly annoying with the amount of homework, but you know, that's not really something I can say, oh, the teacher is a bad teacher because I have to do homework, you know? That would be weird. Ooh, snow clocks. Ah, another lecture. Nice.
Now then, when you want to get control of something that wiggles, it's pretty difficult, isn't it? You try and pick up a fish in your hands, and the fish is wiggly and it slips out. What do you do to get hold of the fish? You use a net. And so the net is the basic thing we have for getting hold of the wiggly world. A net is something regular. And I can number the holes in a net. So many holes up, so many holes across. And if I can number these holes, I can count exactly where each wiggle is in terms of a hole in that net. But in order to do that, I've got to break up the wiggle into bits. And I've got to call this a specific bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle, and this the next bit, and this the next bit of the wiggle. And so these bits are things which I mark out in order to talk about the wiggle, in order to measure it, and therefore in order to control it. But in nature, in fact, in the physical world, the wiggle isn't bitted. So the world doesn't come thing. You and I are all as much continuous with the physical universe as a wave is continuous with the ocean. The ocean waves, and the universe peoples. And as the wave, I wave at you and say, you! The world is waving at me with you. and saying, hi, I'm here. But the way we feel and sense our existence, being based on a myth that we are made, that we are parts, that we are things, our consciousness has been influenced so that each one of us does not feel that. We feel, we have been hypnotized, literally hypnotized by social convention into feeling and sensing that we exist only inside our skins, that we are not the original band, but just something out on the end of it. And therefore we are scared stiff. Because my wave is going to disappear. And I'm going to die. And that would be awful.
Ooh, red-eyed tree frog. Also known as the red-eyed lemur frog in Holland, which I think is a really cool name for any frog, really. But yeah, interesting point. Kind of the same thing, like you kind of try to define stuff that as being separate when it's not really separate, which is kind of the whole thing language does, you know, like we try to define things as separate when really they're not necessarily 100% separate. When perhaps it would be better to define them as being, I don't know, how should I say it? It's difficult, obviously, and he made a good point, but we define ourselves, we define things as separate when they're not necessarily separate. Which creates a weird situation in which we feel that things are separate when they're not. And this has implications on how we feel about ourselves, because we define ourselves as how should I say it? Yeah, as separate from the rest of the world, when we are not necessarily separate from the rest of the world. When we are, I mean, in a sense we are separate, but in a sense we are also not. And I know that's weird, but it is how we are. In a sense we are separate. I can say this atom is part of Steve and this atom is not part of Steve. And I can be reasonably sure about that. But how sure can you really be that everything you are... But there are things that are... There are atoms that will be part of me for now, but will not be part of me while the entity of me is still alive later on. And that is a way in which human beings in general are, or when a way in which, ooh, oryx. I'm getting a lot of animals, I like that. But yeah, it's a way in which we consider ourselves separate from the rest of everything, when in reality saying we are wholly separate from the rest of everything, or in a way in which saying that anything really is separate from the rest of everything is kind of wrong. It's kind of not how it works actually. But it's how we feel it works because of how our language works. And our language, it works well for helping us navigate through the rest of everything, but perhaps it's not the ideal way. I don't know, obviously I'm not a philosopher, so I might very well just be saying nonsense that any philosopher it's a way in which I try to make sense of the world around me, even though I'm not very good at that. Which I think is something that a lot of people probably do, even though they don't want to admit it. So, yeah, that's it for this episode.
You are a fluke.
Oh, gonna listen to
You
this.
are a separate event. And you run from the maternity ward to the crematorium, and that's it, baby. Now, why does anybody think that way? There's no reason to, because it isn't even scientific. It's just a myth. And it's invented by people who wanted to feel a certain way. They want to play a certain game. Camus said there is only really one serious philosophical question, which is whether or not to commit suicide. Should you or not commit suicide? This is a good question. Why go on? And you only go on if the game is worth the candle. Now, the universe has been going on for an incredible long time. And so, really, a satisfactory theory of the universe has to be one that's worth betting on. That's it seems to me, absolutely elementary common sense. If you make a theory of the universe which isn't worth betting on, why bother? Just commit suicide. But if you want to go on playing the game, you've got to have an optimal theory for playing the game.
I feel this is kind of a weird way to look at it. To essentially just say, by the way, I'm chasing that comedian in case you haven't noticed. I really want to be a comedian. But I think it's really weird, honestly, to say, oh, you need to have a theory, you need to have something to understand it all. I don't think that's necessarily necessary even. Like, if you're like, well, I don't understand it all, I just understand part of it and I'm fine with that, like, that's something that I can respect too. But in what he said, in what Camus said, apparently, or Camus, or however you're supposed to pronounce his name, you should know basically how everything works. And I think that's a rather stupid way of looking at the world. You know, of being convinced you know everything. Sometimes you're gonna run into something that you don't know, that you will not understand how it works. Because it's so vastly different from how you yourself work. I, for example, don't understand anything about stuff on the quantum level. And I don't see that as a bad thing, you know. I see it as like, well, I'm not good at stuff at the quantum level, I guess. So, I don't know, I feel it's kind of saying you need to understand everything. Even when, like, you need to at least have a rough understanding of everything, and I feel like that's already false. I feel that's already not true. And I know maybe I'm the only one, but yeah, that's how I feel about what he just said. But yeah, that's really gonna do it for this episode, guys. See you later.